Another hike in interest rates, another blow to borrowers. The Bank of England raises rates to 4% as it continues its fight against inflation. But for millions already struggling with the cost of living crisis, it means yet more money worries.
With a mortgage of £770, well, it'll be over £800 after today's rise. So it's unsustainable. I'll just have to sell up.
And the latest increase takes rates to their highest for 14 years. But could we be about to turn a corner? We hear from the Governor of the Bank of England, also tonight.
Can you please open the door? Otherwise there are lots of people open it for you.
Under fire for underhand practices. British Gas admits using debt collectors to force prepayment meters on vulnerable households. A public inquiry at last into Northern Ireland's worst atrocity after a quarter of a century answers for families bereaved by the Omagh bombing. Still searching for Nicola Bulley, her family's emotional appeal to help find the missing mother of two.
Something's got to have been missed. There's got to be, somebody must know something. Somebody must know. People don't just vanish into thin air.
And a change of club for Gareth Bale. The former football star sets his sights on golf.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. The Bank of England today raised interest rates to a 14-year high, delivering another blow to millions of people already struggling with the cost of living crisis. The base rate now sits at 4%, putting yet more pressure on mortgages, rents and the housing market as the UK sits on the brink of recession. But the Governor of the Bank of England did give us a glimmer of hope today. Andrew Bailey said the impending recession will be shorter and shallower than previously predicted. And he said rocketing inflation may have turned the corner, meaning further rate rises may not, after all, be needed. Here's our economics editor, Joel Hills.
First it was high inflation, now the impact of higher interest rates is starting to be felt everywhere. Here in Hastings, Nicholas Wilson is crowdfunding in order to pay his mortgage, which has risen by more than £300 a month in the last year. He calculates he can probably hold on for another 6 months.
It's unsustainable. I'll just have to sell up. Yeah, I'll probably have to move out in the summer. But you know, it's not easy finding somewhere else to live here. There's a housing crisis as well. But it's heartbreaking.
The Bank of England began increasing interest rates in December 2021 and has since hiked bank rate by almost 4%. These increases have pushed up the average monthly repayment on a tracker rate mortgage by £388. In the course of this year, more than 2 million households are due to refinance when their fixed rate mortgage deals expire. The squeeze on their living standards is about to get worse. The encouraging news is the bank is hinting it may now have done enough to tame inflation.
I see the signs that we're beginning to turn a corner. Inflation is slightly undershot what we thought it would be, but much more important than that, energy prices, which have been obviously one of the big forces pushing inflation up, have come off substantially. And that's good, very good.
Recent interest rate rises have been really big, haven't they? 0.5% today, 0.75% in November. Can you reassure people that if you have to raise interest rates again, it will be in smaller steps?
Well, I can't say that for sure at all. I mean, we are in a very uncertain position.
He's hesitating because the bank is concerned about pay growth. Not in the public sector, where the unions are on the march, but in the private sector, where employees are demanding higher pay rises and appear to be getting them. The bank's worry is companies will fund higher pay simply by raising their prices. Joel Hills, ITV News.
So, yet more worries then for those struggling with the cost of living crisis, especially anyone taking out a new mortgage or indeed coming to the end of their existing deal. Our North of England reporter Sangeeta Lal heard what the impact could be on people in Durham.
So in November 22, we had two options. One was a tracker mortgage, which was like a variable rate. and then one was a fixed rate.
Faced with two options she can't afford, Chrissy's renewed her mortgage this year, but at a cost of an extra £400 a month. As interest rates rise again, Chrissy, who's recently set up her own retail business, says she might have to take money out of it to pay for her home, and she's been forced into a mortgage she didn't want to have.
We had two options, one which was a fixed rate, which was the extra £400 a month. And the other option was like a tracker option,
Which is the variable.
which is a variable, and that was coming out at £170 a month. But it was obviously the one we were going to go for. Yeah. But before that, our mortgage is up for renewal. That's already gone up twice, so that offer is not even available anymore.
Is there now not an affordable option for you?
No, there isn't.
And you've gone with the fixed rate because it's not worth the risk?
Yeah. Because I don't understand how anyone's going to be able to afford this.
Interest rates have now risen for a 10th consecutive time, pushing house prices down as people are less willing to borrow money. Potentially good news for first-time buyers. But for the 1.8 million homeowners preparing to renew their mortgages this year, for many it's hard to know how to make the right move.
Following the rate changes, can we have another look over?
For mortgage advisors, today's news has made it even harder to ease concerns.
If people are skint, you're skint. So if there's an £80 a month increase on the mortgage payment, that's a big deal for a lot of people, especially around here. I was so used to telling people the good news, and then you've got to deliver the bad news, which I took a bit of getting used to.
So we opened in November.
For Chrissy, the rise in rates means her new business might not last the year, and means she might soon have to choose between her live stream or her family home. Sangeeta Lal, ITV News, Durham.
Well, Joel, a lot of worried people there, aren't there? Now, on Tuesday, the IMF said that the UK's economy was going to perform the worst of any developed economy. What did the Governor of the Bank of England say about that today?
Well, the bank does think we're heading into a recession, one that will last until about this time next year, and one that will be as serious as the IMF was forecasting, but much less serious than the bank was fearing just a few months ago in November. Shorter and actually much less sharp. Gas and oil prices have come down, as the Governor was mentioning there. Inflation looks like it'll fall quicker. More people are likely to hold on to their jobs. The outlook is far less gloomy, although, as Andrew Bailey was saying there, he's slightly cautious about this. It's early days, he said. The risks are still large. Inflation isn't yet under control. But here is where I think the bank is even more gloomy than the International Monetary Fund. Today, the Bank of England announced that it thinks actually the UK economy's ability to grow in future without generating inflation has been diminished by Brexit, COVID, the war in Ukraine. And Andrew Bailey said he agreed. The fact that potential output is fallen, is dismal, in his words, and will remain below 0.75% for the foreseeable. This is terrible news for living standards. The recession won't be as bad as feared. The recovery, when it happens, won't really feel like one. The big picture, Mary, is unchanged. The UK looks like it's stuck in a low-growth rut. OK, Joel, thank you for that. Now, the boss of British Gas, Centrica, has told ITV News he's gutted after an undercover investigation showed debt collectors forcing entry into homes to install prepayment meters. Operating on behalf of British Gas, the workers could be heard enjoying breaking into the properties of struggling customers. With a court warrant, the practice is legal, but what is not allowed is forcing them on vulnerable people, and the undercover newspaper sting appears to show exactly that happening. Now, British Gas has now suspended installations, and the energy regulator is investigating. Here's our consumer editor, Chris Choi.
Hello, it's British Gas, your gas supply. We're here with a court warrant. Can you please open the door? Otherwise there are lots of open it for you.
Debt collectors arriving to forcibly install a prepayment meter with little sympathy.
This is the exciting bit. I love this bit.
Which bit?
This bit. I love this bit.
Undercover footage shows debt collection contractors working on behalf of British Gas and its parent company, Centrica. This type of forced entry to switch meters is legal if there's a court warrant, but it shouldn't occur in households with vulnerable people. It happened even though a neighbour told them a single parent with 3 children lives here, a potential sign of vulnerability.
How can your procedures at British Gas be so lacking that this has happened.
I'm gutted at this, Chris. This doesn't represent our 20,000 colleagues. Yesterday morning, we suspended all installations of prepayment meters under one, at least until the end of the winter. I just want to make sure that I can fully understand what's gone wrong here.
The hidden camera shows one of the debt collectors' views on judging which customers are vulnerable.
If they're just saying, oh, I'm a single mum and I got 3 kids, and that's not vulnerability. Right. It is a vulnerability, but I'm a bit old school and a bit hard-nosed.
Will you now commit to reviewing every single case where somebody has been forcibly switched to a prepayment meter?
My commitment is when we get it wrong, which we do sometimes, we make it right. That's my commitment.
Last year, 600,000 people were forced onto prepay meters. British Gas confirmed it's used court warrants to forcibly install around 20,000 in the last year. Official guidelines say it shouldn't happen in vulnerable households, including those with disabled people, children under 5, or people who've reached the state pension age. Today's investigation found debt collectors using forced switching at homes, which included a 77-year-old. Today, the Energy Minister met British Gas bosses.
It's just appalling. It's not good enough. Only last week, British Gas announced steps they were going to take to support vulnerable customers, and it turns out they were doing anything but.
Energy officials at Ofgem have started an urgent inquiry, and tonight the head of the UK's Vulnerability Register said this footage shows firms must do more.
There are things that can be done to identify who is vulnerable. It might be something simply to identify how old somebody is, and if the energy companies don't know how old those people are, they should find out.
Today's undercover investigation highlights worrying cases of how people are switched to prepay. But its most significant effect may be to intensify questions about whether forced switching should happen at all. Chris Choi, ITV News.
As millions struggle with the spiralling cost of energy, the oil giant Shell has recorded its biggest profit in 115 years. Its annual adjusted profits rocketed £32.2 billion last year, and that is more than £1,000 every second. It more than doubled its profits of just over £15.5 billion in 2021. And it beat the previous record set in 2008. The massive profit has angered many and also reignited calls for a windfall tax on energy giants. Our reporter Pablo Taylor is at a Shell forecourt in North London. Pablo, where has all this money come from?
Well, Mary, 2022 may not have been a vintage year for many of us, but for Shell, it certainly was. £32 billion, its highest ever profits, and much of that, of course, came after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which, of course, had a huge impact on the price of oil and gas. Now, for the drivers at this Shell garage in London, many of whom have had to pay a high price for their fuel over the past year, well, the news has certainly not gone down well. Do you think it's fair?
It's not fair, but what we can do? What we can do, go and say we don't buy the petrol from you?
It's getting very difficult for people, very stressful. And how can they be making record profits when all this is going on?
It's appalling for customers that are having to put X amount of money in their tank.
Well, these forecourts are certainly not the main source of Shell's profits. It makes a lot of money from refining oil, and it makes billions from its thousands of traders who buy and sell energy. And the more volatile the market, the more money there is to be made. All of this, though, has increased the pressure on the government to make sure that these companies are paying the correct amount of tax. Last year, it introduced a windfall tax, which generated from Shell £100 million. But the critics say that that represents just a tiny amount of the kind of money that this company is able to make, and it, along with all of the other energy giants, need to be paying a lot more.
OK, Pablo Taylor in North London. Thank you. Households in England and Wales are going to suffer the largest increase to their water bills in almost 20 years. From April, water bills are going to rise to an average of £448, and that is an increase of 7.5%. Consumer groups say the rise could prove to be the tipping point for the 1 in 5 customers who are already really struggling to pay. Now, a public inquiry will finally look at whether the 1998 Omagh bombing could have been prevented. The UK government made the announcement today following a long campaign from victims' families. 29 people, including a woman pregnant with twins, were killed when a bomb planted by the real IRA exploded in the town. It is now hoped the truth about what happened will finally emerge, as our correspondent Peter Smith now reports.
The deadliest attack of the Troubles. The Omagh bomb in August 1998 killed 29 people, including a woman pregnant with twins. A group called the Real IRA claimed responsibility, but could they have been stopped? Today, the UK government announced an inquiry to find out if intelligence failures played a part in this atrocity.
I intend to establish an independent statutory inquiry into the Omagh bombing. I've informed Mr Gallagher and members of the Omagh Support and Self-Help Group, as well as representatives of families moving on, of this decision. The inquiry will focus specifically on the four grounds which the court held as giving rise to plausible arguments that the bombing could have been prevented.
Since the bombing, a series of failures have already been uncovered. In 2001, a police ombudsman report said leadership of police during the Omagh bomb investigation was seriously flawed. 10 years ago, then Northern Ireland Secretary Theresa Villiers announced there would not be a public inquiry. But 2 years ago, a Belfast High Court ruled it was plausible the bomb could have been prevented by security services, and a judge called for new investigations. Because the warning said the bomb was at the top of Market Street, police steered people down the hill. They thought they were coming here for safety. In fact, they were being directed straight towards the deadly blast. For almost 25 years now, the families of those who lost loved ones believed this was preventable. And now they have hope they will finally find out why it was not prevented. Watching that announcement today, two relatives of Omagh bombing victims who have campaigned tirelessly for almost a quarter of a century to hear this moment.
I intend to establish an independent statutory inquiry into the Omagh bombing.
Stanley was thinking of his wife Anne, who was killed in the blast.
Just mixed emotions, you know. It's fantastic that we're getting a result, but we know why we're getting a result. Because that person in your life is not here anymore. And it hasn't been for 25 years, but this brings it all back as if it was yesterday.
Michael lost his son Aidan. Today's announcement is progress, but it is not the end of his fight for justice.
Until we hear from those people that can give us the answers, we will be tortured for the rest of our lives. Could that have been? And let's have that. That's painful.
The Garden Memorial in Omagh was quiet today. This inquiry is no cause for celebration. Still, no one has been convicted, and families may never know who did this. But they are now one step closer to knowing how it happened.
Let's go straight then to Peter in Omagh. 25 years, Peter. It's been such a long journey for these families. How great do you think the impact is upon them?
Well, the wheels of justice can turn slowly, and that is especially the case, as we've seen here in Northern Ireland when it comes to matters relating to the Troubles. And here in the Omagh bombing, that's because there are questions for the intelligence agencies, ultimately about who knew what and when what intelligence was shared, what intelligence was not shared, and could that have prevented these 29 lives from being taken. Now, these intelligence agencies are in the UK, in the Republic of Ireland and in America, so there are huge sensitivities around this. My understanding is that the terms of reference in the inquiry will be decided by the chair. That chair will be a senior judge. And while any criticisms will be made public, matters relating to national security will not be made public. So yes, a glimmer of hope for the families, but it's unlikely that they will get the full picture after this.
OK, Peter Smith in Omagh, thank you. A former soldier has been given a suspended sentence for killing a man at an army checkpoint in Northern Ireland more than 30 years ago. Aidan McAnespie was shot in the back as he walked through a border security checkpoint in County Tyrone in 1988. David Holden admitted firing the shot which killed him, but he said it had happened by accident because his hands were wet. Last year, he became the first veteran to be convicted of a Troubles-era killing since the Good Friday Peace Agreement in 1998. Now, the family of missing mother of two, Nicola Bulley, have urged anyone who may have any information about her disappearance to please come forward and help. The 45-year-old was last seen on Friday morning walking her dog in Wyre in Lancashire. Nicola left her mobile phone and the dog on a bench, and no trace has been found of her since. Well, today, police divers searched a river near where she was last seen. Our North of England reporter Kelly Foran has the latest.
Gripping their hands tightly together, hoping for a breakthrough, is all Nicola's family feel they can do since she disappeared 6 days ago.
Somebody must know something. Somebody must know. People don't just vanish into thin air.
Nicola went missing moments after dropping her two little girls at school.
There's two young children there waiting for their mummy to come back.
Their little minds are trying to process. They don't really understand. None of us understand, to be honest.
She parks the car in the school car park, walks across past St Michael's Church, through that little lane, up to the open field, and that's where she does it every day.
The search operation today has been focused beside the bench where her mobile phone and dog Willow were found almost a week ago.
Everyone that's been involved doing a sweep search of the fields, etc., it's just given us hope that someone might find something.
Divers have spent the day searching this area, taking it in turns to comb the edges of the riverbank. The water here is just over 4 metres deep. The search is a slow and thorough process.
It's a hard. We're such a close-knit family. We are a close-knit family, I'm sorry. But we're such a close-knit family. We do anything for any one of us, and the children would do the same for us.
Flowers have been left from another dog walker with a message of thoughts and prayers for the family, who are waiting and hoping for answers.
Yeah, just hope she comes home.
Kelly Foran, ITV News, Lancashire.
Well, there is plenty more still to come. The ITV News, including a special report into how the generosity of the British people, a huge £400 million donation, is helping to feed the hungry of war-torn Ukraine. A shake-up in social care in England. Will it be enough to prevent the death of another vulnerable child like little Arthur? And find out which prominent portrait will not be featured on future Australian banknotes. All that's still to come after the break. Join me then. Hello and welcome back. The deaths of two young children, both killed by a parent's partner, has prompted a new plan to protect the most vulnerable. Arthur Labinjo Hughes and Star Hobson were both murdered in 2020. And the government is now spending £200 million to try to improve support for at-risk children across England. And that is far lower than the amount an independent review said was needed. Here's our social affairs correspondent Sarah Corker on why reform is long overdue.
A record number of children are growing up in care in a system that all too often fails them.
I did not know when I returned home from school that day if the same people are going to be living there or not.
From the age of 13, Shauna was repeatedly moved between relatives, care homes and foster placements. At one point, she was even homeless.
I think the biggest impact that it had was that feeling of lack of belonging. Like, at no point did I feel like I fitted in somewhere, that people loved me, that people cared for me. I think it all felt very transactional.
The government's reform of the care system includes 12 pilot areas where there will be early support for vulnerable families before they reach crisis point, a recruitment drive and more financial help for foster carers, and the leaving care allowance will rise by £1,000 from April.
What we're doing is testing and learning over the next 2 years
to make sure that we can have some of the more innovative reforms in the package working really properly, and of course we're ambitious to go further.
There is more money from government, £200 million over the next 2 years. But last year, the independent review into the sector found that 5 times that amount was needed to transform a creaking and under-resourced system. The national charity supporting children in care warns the changes just don't go far enough.
But the action set out, the timescale, the investment, it is not going to achieve the sea change that we need in children's social care.
This shake-up follows the horrific murders of 1-year-old Star Hobson and 6-year-old Arthur Labinio Hughes, both killed in their homes by their parents' partners. Arthur's cousin says reform of the child protection system is long overdue.
To think that children are left to a point like those 2 children were, I can't comprehend how no change has been implemented sooner.
There will be a focus on recruiting more social workers, but caseloads are spiralling.
There are many social workers who are already burning out because the stress is very high. We can't support our families the way we want to. We feel like failures. We feel like we are disappointing our families.
Despite all the hurdles Sean has faced, she's now studying for a PhD in neuroscience, and she hopes these reforms could help to change the lives of thousands of vulnerable children. Sarah Corker, ITV News.
Police are searching for 2 men who attempted to kidnap 2 young boys in Basingstoke yesterday evening. The boys, aged 12 and 13, were approached by the men in a black Volkswagen and offered money to get in the car. Hampshire police say the boys ran to a nearby supermarket and the men drove off. Charges of attempted rape and assault against Manchester United's Mason Greenwood have been dropped. The Crown Prosecution Service said there was no longer a realistic prospect of conviction. And a driver who rammed a police officer off his motorbike has been jailed for 4 years. 24-year-old Joseph Ward left the officer with leg, back and shoulder injuries after the incident in North London last year. Now, Australia's new $5 note will not show the face of the king as the country moves further away from its traditional ties with the monarchy. King Charles will still appear on Aussie coins, but the fiver will instead have an Indigenous design. It's raised questions about the king's role in the country, as Danny Sinha reports.
It's no small change. Queen Elizabeth II has been on the $5 note for 30 years. But after her death, questions were asked about whether it was time to shake up the status quo. And this is the result. King Charles will not be on the note. Instead, a design celebrating the country's Indigenous past rather than its colonial one will feature.
A decision taken independently by the Reserve Bank in consultation with the government is an opportunity to strike a good balance here. The monarch will still be on the coins, but the $5 note will say more about our history and our heritage and our country.
But there's an ongoing political debate within the country about whether it should become a republic. The opposition leader is accusing the Prime Minister of forcing through the change.
I just think you've got to stand up and a lot more Australians have to be heard. I know the silent majority don't agree with a lot of the woke nonsense that goes on.
King Charles will still appear on coins, but there are renewed calls about whether Australia should follow countries like Barbados in becoming a republic.
But I think in a way it just raises the sense that the British monarchy as a brand now overseas, countries that formerly were proud perhaps to have the Queen on their currency, just no longer see it as something that represents and reflects them.
As the country's head of state, King Charles continues to show his commitment to Australia, even if his face doesn't quite fit the bill. Danny Sinha, ITV News.
It is a little after 7 o'clock. You're watching the ITV Evening News. A reminder of our main headlines tonight. The Bank of England has raised interest rates to a 14-year high. The base rate now sits at 4%. British Gas is under investigation after an undercover investigation showed debt collectors working for the energy firm forcing entry into homes to install prepayment meters. Still to come on the programme this evening, the call for greater action from landlords as we delve into the shocking scale of mould and damp in social housing. A shake-up in how your club is run. We'll bring you the details leaked from the government's new football charter.
And why do these penguins have an earlier bedtime than other creatures at the aquarium? Find out later along with your full weather forecast.
That's all coming later, but first, a special report on how the generosity of British people is providing vital support to Ukrainians who, of course, suffered so much as a result of the war. The Disasters and Emergency Committee humanitarian appeal has so far raised more than £400 million, and that is the largest single donation in the world. The money's being used in many different projects, all with the aim of giving much-needed help to the most vulnerable there. ITV News has seen two of them in action in Kharkiv, a children's centre which gives crucial mental health support, and a food distribution centre. Our correspondent John Ray reports.
In this blackened landscape, along the line where Russia's invasion met Ukrainian resistance, the buildings disfigured by war far outnumber the few that stand intact. It is the same for the people here. Like Ludmilla, her children and grandchildren gone, she alone stayed behind. It seems astonishing that there is still human life here, never mind a community and a spirit that flourishes. Every day the air raid sirens sound. And yet every day volunteers ensure there is something to eat.
To give food is something like to create guarantee this day is good. To create some kind of security.
For the survival of this country, it is as important as any tank supplied by the West.
It is some while since the worst of the war tore through this place. Lives ended, lives uprooted, and yet, despite all this, life has to go on. In fact, in this strange, changed world, it is the most natural act of defiance.
And what could be more natural than this? Safe from the horrors outside.
Now children more worried. Some children can't speak. Some children don't remember how to speak each other.
Regular schools are closed, but at this centre there is psychological help for young minds struggling with the pressures of war.
Here they can play to each other, they can speak to adult people who love them, and they can relax here.
These are children with fading memories of life before there were missiles.
Do you get scared?
No. Only when there are 10 or more rockets, says Vlada, then my mother gets afraid and we run to the bathroom and hide there.
Когда была ночь, тогда все спали, мне что-то захотелось в туалет. Мы бежали из туалета, а там бабах выбыл. Я испугалась, и там с фонариком кто-то светил.
Misha is 4 years old, but seems suddenly much older, says his mum.
Так, я вважаю, що просто такий час, що їм приходиться швидко дорослішати. Їм приходиться розуміти ті речі, які дитина не має розуміти.
Misha's father is away at the front line, in a town where the fighting is fiercest. He sees his son for just 1 or 2 days every month.
You miss him? Ты скучаешь по папе? Да. Когда я не спал, а когда мама спала, знаешь что? Приехал папа, я сказал: «Папа!»
Він так само дуже переживає, він дуже боїться втратити тата. Він постійно питає, а чи не знищать тато, чи не загине тато, а як тато лікарі вилікують чи ні.
In Ukraine they worry that the war has lost its capacity to shock, to stir hearts, to summon help from distant lands with troubles of their own. But no one wants an end to this torment more than the children.
When the war finishes, how are you going to celebrate?
John Ray, ITV News, Kharkiv.
And you can find more from John, including details of how you can donate to the continuing DEC appeal over on our website. That's itv.com/news. Now, the Housing Ombudsman has told ITV News that landlords need to do much more to improve the state of their properties. It followed a report which found that 160,000 households live in social housing with notable mould and damp. The social housing regulator also found that 8,000 homes are so bad they pose a serious risk to health. Our investigations correspondent Daniel Hewitt has highlighted the shocking scale of substandard housing, and he joins me now. And this does confirm, doesn't it, a lot of what you've been saying?
I think it does, but I think that number, Mary, is underestimated. Some context here. After the death of 2-year-old Awab Ishak, which we'll all remember, how could you forget, in a mould-infested flat in Rochdale, the regulator said it was going to investigate how many homes in England it believed people were living in with these kind of conditions. As you say, it estimates 160,000 social homes, so homes run by housing associations and councils, have notable mould and damp. A further 80,000 have very serious mould and damp, 8,000 so bad that it's risking the lives of people living in them. Why do I think that is underestimating, though? Well, firstly, the landlords say that, the regulator says that some landlords provided very poor evidence to them in this investigation. Some landlords didn't even provide any data at all, and I understand the regulator didn't speak to any tenants as part of this report. It only spoke to landlords, so it's effectively only taking their word for it. Perhaps more worryingly, though, today the Ombudsman said just a third, 1 in 3 landlords, even have a policy to deal with mould and damp complaints. This is what he had to say.
I think there's been a kind of creeping normalisation of some of the attitudes and behaviours that residents experiencing damp and mould were subjected to, and that has to change, and that's at the heart of really seeing transformational change.
Now, it shouldn't take, Mary, the death of a 2-year-old boy to get this sector to act. It seems, though, not even that has prompted some landlords to do anything about this.
All right, so the fight goes on.
Yeah.
Daniel Hewitt, thank you. A man has been accused of hatching a sophisticated, calculating and cool-headed plot to kill Natalie McNally. The 32-year-old victim, who was pregnant, was stabbed to death in her home in Lurgan in County Armagh just before Christmas. Excuse me. Stephen McCullough, who's from nearby Lisburn, is accused of her murder. UTV reporter Judith Hill is in Belfast tonight. And Judith, there were incredible claims made in court today, weren't there?
Yes, a lead detective told the court the man accused of murdering Natalie McNally had staged a video gaming live stream on the night she was killed in order to create an alibi. But police said cyber experts had found it was pre-recorded and then put out as if it was live. Stephen McCullough from Woodland Gardens in Lisburn denies Natalie's murder. The 32-year-old had previously been arrested back in December but was ruled out as a suspect and released. He was rearrested earlier this week. Now, police say McCullough acknowledged that he was not live streaming, instead claiming he was drinking in his house that night and had fallen asleep. 32-year-old Natalie, who was 15 weeks pregnant, was stabbed to death in her Lurgan home on December the 18th. Her parents and brothers were in Lisburn today for this hearing, and the court heard McCullough had been texting Natalie on the afternoon she was killed and that he had interactions with her family in the weeks after. The detective claimed the accused left his phone in Natalie's parents' home and that audio was recorded. Police believe this was an attempt to find out if the family suspected him. A lawyer for the PPS claimed the defendant had hatched a sophisticated, calculated and cold-headed plot to kill Natalie, and that every detail was carefully thought through. Stephen McCullough was remanded in custody to appear again at the end of the month after his bail application was rejected. Natalie's family has thanked the public for their ongoing support but has now asked for privacy to grieve.
OK, Judith Hill in Belfast, thank you. Now, football club owners who can't prove their wealth is legitimate could be barred under new rules on the way the sport is run. A leaked government paper on the forthcoming football charter is said to propose new checks on potential owners. Steve Scott reports.
A low point for English football, protests against a European Super League and a breakdown in the relationship between fans and the top clubs. Just one controversy new regulation could prevent happening again. Others revealed in a leaked document today include owners having to prove on an ongoing basis they have the funding to keep clubs afloat. Potential buyers would face tougher tests, again ongoing, and robust checks on unexplained sources of wealth. Fans will be given new powers to prevent owners changing logos and kits and have more say in how the club is run. And there would be a ban on joining breakaway tournaments like the European Super League.
The regulator is also expected to be given the powers to redistribute some of the billions made by the Premier League if necessary. The government would rather football came up with its own deal, but is prepared to step in if there's a standoff between the Premier League and the rest of the football pyramid.
Those running lower league clubs say if the Premier League increased the amount it gives and distributed it more evenly, it would make a huge difference.
It's not a question of their share being heavily handed over, because of the gap be so huge. A small percentage being shared with the lower leagues would make a massive difference to them, and it would hardly, affect their operation at all. Well, it wouldn't affect it.
The Premier League has always questioned why its wealth should be used to prop up poorly run businesses like Bury, which was placed into administration in 2020. If a regulator weeds bad owners out, that argument becomes more difficult.
The Premier League is very clever. I mean, it's used its huge financial muscle to, let's call it, impose soft power on the rest of the game. And I think the Premier League will find that its power will be balanced somewhat. That's a very important part of this.
Time to call last orders in this transfer window.
The proposals are perfectly timed at the end of the latest transfer window when, despite the cost of living crisis, Premier League clubs have still managed to spend hundreds of millions of pounds. Steve Scott, ITV News.
And we will be staying with football in just a few minutes, but it has just gone tea time. So, could a change of career be on the cards for this former Welsh footy international?
And from Wales to Sharks, I'm at the aquarium with your full forecast.
Join Lucy and me for that right after this short break. See you then. And welcome back. Now, the longer days and slightly warmer temperatures may be noticeable to us, but they aren't to creatures living in London's aquarium. Lucy Virasamy is there for us tonight. Lucy.
Yes, what seems like a very long January is now gone, and we're into the first stages of February and slightly longer days, the promise of a little more in the way of daylight. And I'm at the Sea Life London Aquarium this evening, and behind me, the shark tank. Here we've got a mixture of natural and artificial light, and the toasty waters here heated to a tropical 24 degrees to mimic their natural environment, because I've learnt that daylight hours are just as important to the marine life here at the aquarium as they are to us. I was in a colder spot earlier with some very characterful penguins, I have to say. They were jumping in and out of the water, splashing around, loving life. I found out that they can zip through the water at 22 miles an hour, can you believe? Icy cold waters at that. And I spoke to Charlotte, a member of the animal care team here, to learn a little more. And I arrived just in time to see these cute creatures have their dinner, so it was really perfect timing.
Manipulating the lighting hours for the penguins is really crucial because it will trigger two key events throughout the year. First is the breeding season, which happens around springtime as the days start to get longer, like they are for us now. And then immediately after that is summertime, which is when they have their molting season. And molting is a process in which the penguins will essentially lose all their feathers all at once, and then they grow a brand new set for the new year.
Yes, I have to say it was quite chilly by the penguins a little earlier. Let's see if the temperatures are set to drop for us and if colder air is on its way. I've got the full forecast for you now.
Today, expect to see some heavy downpours all over the country.
Heinz Beans sponsors ITV National Weather.
So nowhere near as chilly as it could be this time of year, certainly a little on the mild side for many of us. A lot of cloud in the next few days, limiting that winter sunshine, and quite blustery out there, particularly strong winds across the north. If we look at the bigger picture, high pressure in control across the south, keeping it a little calmer, a little more action further north with brisk winds and outbreaks of rain from time to time. Looking ahead into the next few hours through this evening and tonight, nowhere near as cold as it could be, certainly frost-free, with just a little mist and murk across the Cumbrian Fells and the Pennines into the small hours. A little chillier for northern Scotland, mind you. And then into the first stages of tomorrow morning, well, a lot of cloud, a little grotty for parts of Scotland, northern England and Northern Ireland as rain moves through. A little dull and damp for a time, quite blustery winds. Elsewhere, a breezy end to the week. The best of the brighter skies developing further west, so much awaited winter sunshine here, and very mild highs of 12 or 13 degrees. As for Saturday, well, a little more cloud on the cards, it has to be said. Temperatures down a notch, but they still remain well above average for the time of year.
Heinz Beans sponsors ITV National Weather.
Well, a very mild few days ahead, but nowhere near as tropical as the Shark Tank behind me.
OK, Lucy, thank you. And finally tonight, as a footballer, Gareth Bale was one of the greatest players of his generation, of course. But far from retiring quietly, he's now planning to turn his formidable talents to golf. Rhys Williams explains.
This is one of the greatest soccer players, and I know we have people watching from all over the world, footballers ever.
He only retired in January, but Gareth Bale clearly hasn't lost that competitive edge. OK, this isn't the proper PGA Tour, he's here as a celebrity, but clearly a handy player. Not a bad first tee-off. The former Wales captain looked happy with that one.
This is Bale.
But his second shot found him here. He was soon back on the green, though, to set up a birdie putt.
Oh!
It wasn't to be at the first hole, but a respectable par in his first outing. He may have won 5 Champions League titles at Real Madrid, but his time there was tainted by constant criticism. He cared more for his golfing hobby than football. After qualifying for Euro 2022 with Wales, his teammates famously held aloft this tongue-in-cheek banner listing his priorities. And he gets plenty of practice back at home in the Vale of Glamorgan, though it's not hard when this is your back garden. Replicas of the 3 most famous holes in the world.
Here we go. Come on, Gareth.
Around the corner at Wenvo Castle Golf Club, where Bale has played before, the committee was impressed.
Yeah, good opening.
Yeah,
can't
We'll take that as the first hole, yeah.
I'd take that.
If he can improve from here, he'll be a pretty good player.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm sure he'd be happy with that.
Yeah, so he's got the power, he just needs the finesse.
Yeah, and he's got a nice swing.
He's used to getting his team out of trouble, but golf's an individual sport, and with shots like this,
It's an amazing shot.
maybe Gareth Bale could forge a path to his new career. Rhys Williams, ITV News, Vale of Glamorgan.
I want to watch, isn't it? And that's all from us. Julie's here at 10, but from me and all the evening news team, bye-bye.